Hey BookTube, it's time for another January wrap-up.
I got my ticket for the long way round.
I read about 15 books in January, and it was a pretty even split between contemporary romance and all of that love and everything else, which was sci-fi, fantasy, post-apocalyptic, mystery, YA, pretty much across the board. And so let me tell you about what those books were. I'm going to start out with What's Left of Me by Zhang. This was narrated on audio by Kim Mai Guest, and it is book 1 in the Hybrid Chronicles. I thought I was going to really love this book. It's got a great premise about two souls being born into every one body and how one is supposed to fade away and the dominant soul is supposed to kind of take over, and what happens when that doesn't happen. What happens when you stay with two people in one body. Dystopian world, they're trying to get rid of the hybrids that have two souls, and this just had so much potential, but gosh, it was just a watery, bland kind of mess. It wasn't badly written, and it wasn't a bad story. It just didn't have enough. Like, there was no depth to it. All in all, I felt like it was way underdeveloped, and I don't even care about going on to the next book in the series, although a lot of people like this series. So, you know, if you've read it, I would love to hear your thoughts. I only gave this one 2 stars. Black Ice by Becca Fitzpatrick. This was narrated on audio by Jenna, Lamia, who I love. So she's the reason I picked up the book, actually. This is a very YA murder mystery. It takes place in the Grand Teton Mountains during a blizzard, and it involves a main character who isn't stupid, but I don't know, I had a few problems with her. It's a pretty predictable story, and the pacing seemed off to me. It had kind of a very convenient, somewhat predictable ending, although it did have an epilogue that I kind of liked. I think because real life had kicked in, and yet not years down the road real life, like chick lit has a habit of doing. This would make a great Lifetime or Hallmark movie. Overall, I think it's a good story, and it's moderately well done, so I gave it 3 stars. Into the Still Blue, this is book 3 in the Under the Never Sky series by Veronica Rossi. I liked this. I was surprised because when I very first read Under the Never Sky, I didn't like it at all. I did not like this book, and I put it down, and then later I picked it up again and gave it another chance. I still didn't love it, but I liked it well enough to go on to the second book in the series, and I liked that better. And so this third book, it's been a long time since I read the first 2, so I wasn't sure I would remember everything, but I did. And I have to say, this was a pretty good conclusion to the series. One of my original problems was that there was a lot of cheese. The teenagers seemed very teenagery to me. The main characters were just very immature. I didn't like the way they behaved. I didn't like their relationship. I found a lot of the things in the book disconnected. But I have to say, in this third book, that relationship between these 2 teenagers has really matured, and I appreciated that. I think it had a lot of good action, and it maintained a really good tension throughout the story. I did think that the ending was just a little bit cliche, but it was okay because it wasn't too sugary. Ultimately, I think that Veronica Rossi's writing matured right along with the characters. So by the time we got to this last book, it was good. It was a nice ending to the series. So I gave this one 4 stars. Here and Trapped, which are book 1 and 2 in the Here series by Ella James. These are narrated on audio by Allison, McLemore, and Eric Michael. And this is an underrated series that I didn't know about. I had it as a free ebook, and so I realized that I could get it with WhisperSync for really cheap. So I picked up the 2 audio books, and I'm really glad I did. The narration was really good. Eric Michael in the first book was kind of stiff, and he is not in the second book. Allison McLemore does that one alone. The only issue I had with the narration was that when the characters would shout or yell, or the tension was really high and the action was really, moving along, she would voice their yelling and shouting as whispering strongly. Now, I don't like that because I know a lot of narrators who will just turn away from the microphone and shout. And when they just whisper, like, and he said, "Oh my gosh, get out of there." it sounds like he's whispering or she's whispering. You know, you get the idea here. I just didn't care for it at all because I think it took away from the tension and the atmosphere of the situation. So, you know, I didn't like that. But the rest of the narration was good, and I thought she accomplished a lot, added a lot to the story with it. So I'd give it a passing grade, a little above average. The story here is confused, amnesiac boy who appears out of nowhere meets girl who is grieving her dead father who has died of leukemia. So it's the story of how they figure out who he is and what he's doing here and all that kind of thing. Why is it he knows stuff and can do stuff? So great story. A lot of tension in it, a lot of good action. I was riveted. I really didn't want to put this down. And so if I had been reading it as a book, it would have been a page turner. As it was, I just didn't want to get those earbuds out of my ears. The bad guys enter slowly. There is a major cliffhanger at the end of the first book, which apparently when it came out, there was a pretty long wait for the second book because this author has kind of gone off into a different genre and she's getting very popular there, and she's left this series kind of by the wayside. So book 2 picks up the story where the cliffhanger left off and adds in a very snarky, very entertaining character who's an alien. The action kind of gets a little bit predictable because it's the whole, who's going to save the earth kind of thing. But the thing I really enjoyed was all the fake science. And especially the main protagonist, the way that he would try and describe alien thoughts, culture, perception, elements to a human girl. I thought this author did a great job of that, taking this kind of alien who's none of that stuff translates into what we experience and know. And she just did a great job with that. I really liked these 2 books, and I'm hoping that the author picks up and does a 3rd book in the trilogy because the second book ended the conclusion was good. I have to say, it wasn't really open-ended, although it did leave room for a 3rd book, and there were a lot of questions that were not answered, but it wasn't one of those, I'm dying for the next book kind of cliffhanger endings, so thankfully we're not going to have to die of suspense. I have tweeted this author and said, hey, are you going to do this? And so hopefully she will. I know she's busy with other projects, but I just think this story is so good. It really needs a solid ending with these characters. I gave each one of these 4 stars. Raging Star by Moira Young. This is narrated on audio by Heather Lind, and it is book 3 in the Dustlands series. I have had this sitting around to read for a while, and I just hadn't gotten to it. I love this series. It's Blood Red Road, and then Rebel Heart, and then this final book, Raging Star. I think a lot of people would have found this book to be anticlimactic, but I don't think it is. I think it's just that this author chose to follow a different kind of a plot line where it's more of a roller coaster ride that's gradually moving up rather than a straight line build to the big final, thing. There are a lot of little big things that happen and then things will back off. And so I think that some people might have perceived that to be a lag or a slowdown in the plot, but I just didn't find it to be that. One thing I really love about this series is that it has a real Old West feel to it. It's post-apocalyptic, but life is very cheap. It's very cheap. People get killed all the time, or they just die of exposure or, not having enough to eat, that kind of thing. It's kind of like they're pioneers. Life is cheap. Another thing that I think worked well on audio, but that a lot of people in print would have not liked, is the language. A lot of this is told in a vernacular, and it really translated well to the audio. In print, probably not so much, but see, this is another reason why I love audiobooks. I think this series would make a fabulous series of movies or even just one movie. And I think it would be great if it got picked up as a franchise. I really liked it. I thought it was a very good ending to this series. I love these characters. I'm sad to see them go, and I gave this one 4 stars. And lastly, This Shattered World by Amie Kaufman and Meagan Spooner. This was narrated from 2 points of view by Donabella, Mortel, and Callard Harris. And there are dream sequences that happen at the very beginning of each chapter, and those were narrated by Lincoln Hoppe. It is book 2 in the Starbound series. Book 1 is This Shattered World, and then there's a novella that bridges the first and second books called This Night So Dark. This is not a traditional sequel in that it doesn't take the characters from the first 2 books and continue their story. Instead, it's set in the same galaxy, but it takes place on a planet where different things are happening, and it's a different planet from the first book, and it's a completely different situation. There are some elements that are common to both books, but a lot of people, I think, are going to think this is a sequel, and they're not going to be happy because it's not. But it's a great story in and of itself. And so I've done a complete review on this, and so you can find that below, and I will just say that I think this is an excellent example of the way that 2 talented authors can collaborate and come up with something really magical. You have complex characters, great action. Overall, the story was wonderful, and I really liked it. I gave it the very top of 4 stars. So that's all the sci-fi, etc. stuff that I read. If you've read any of these books, I would love to know your thoughts on them. So let's talk about that in comments. And that's it for now for me. I will see you next time. Thanks for watching.
You're gonna miss me when I'm gone. You're gonna miss me by my walk. You're gonna miss me by my talk. Oh, you're gonna miss me when I'm gone.